only one thing matters: learning to be the loser. On paper, Emil Cioran should be the most famous philosopher in our culture. He wrote in a short, punchy, aphoristic style, which should be well suited to our shorter modern attention spans. He had a dour view of humankind, which plays nicely with our generation's deep-seated aversion to other people. And he was an insomniac, so he would have been up at 4 a.m. right alongside you while you try to scroll so far back through social media that it reverts to an AOL chat room. Cioran may not be a household name in our time, but his work did gain a glimmer of notoriety when in the late 90s an NBA star brought this 20th century pessimistic Romanian philosopher's morose insights into America's living room. This star, Indiana Pacers shooting guard Reggie Miller, didn't illuminate Cioran's work by chance. Miller lived and breathed Cioran's philosophical pessimism through a life intimately entangled with affliction. For Reggie Miller, the universe refused to allow him to succeed. Cioran showed him how to fail. Miller wasn't introduced to the philosophy of Emil Cioran until later in his life, after his failures in college basketball. When he joined UCLA, Miller had wide-eyed dreams of lifting title trophies, holding collegiate and NBA records, and being considered one of the best basketball players of all time. However, Miller soon discovered that the basketball court, much like life outside of it, is flippant towards the aspirations of our naive childhood minds. In college, Miller had his first encounters with failure. He fell just short of the all-time scoring record at UCLA, failing to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and later learned that the NIT title he won was completely meaningless, as noted by the NCAA, basketball pundits, and existentialist philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard. After all this disappointment, Miller began to ask himself, why am I failing? Why am I not enough? Why isn't anything working out the way that I thought it would? Despite the despair about his lack of achievement in collegiate basketball, the NBA still sought out Miller's talents in the Pro League, where he was drafted by the Indiana Pacers. Initially, the people of Indiana lamented Miller's selection by the team, further contributing to Miller's feelings of alienation from his peers and society as a whole. It is in this time that Miller found the work of a philosopher that would change his outlook forever. One day at practice, Miller was spotted with a copy of a small book titled The Trouble with Being Born. The title alone caused his teammates to worry about him. They became anxious that their colleague had sunk into a depression and lost all hope. But they didn't need to worry about that at all, because he already had lost all hope. In losing hope, however, he had gained acceptance. In this short book of aphorisms, Miller discovered the writings of a man who despised existence, loathed humanity, and decried hope and aspiration. But this didn't demoralize him. It gave him peace. In Cioran's caustic, despairing prose, Miller found an existential compatriot, a comrade from the wasteland of hopelessness, an experienced guide in the dark jungle of alienation that would lead him through this new and desolate thicket. It is from this time that we get Miller's now famous image, inspired by his intellectual hero. The gesture of choking echoes Emil Cioran's own view that existence is suffocating, and that we are all alienated and doomed to suffer alone, with few who ever notice, and even less who really care to help us. To be able to draw breath is to be unable to draw enough breath. After discovering the works of Cioran, Miller began to grow his hair out, quote Cioran in French, and began to refer to everything as torment. He also took to calling himself a Cioran enthusiast, before realizing that actually calling oneself an enthusiast about anything was expressly un-Cioran. Although the people of Indiana initially repudiated Reggie Miller, he found the destination suitable, as he saw Indiana as the Romania of the United States. Soon, Miller began playing regularly and established himself as a shooting threat. He would seldom celebrate after scoring, as in his view to celebrate anything was to deny the inherent suffering of existence, except for whenever he performed a crossover on someone and broke their ankles, then swished a fadeaway over them, because that is exactly the kind of pure sublimity in which one forgets one is still alive. During his tenure at Indiana, Miller repeatedly found himself in philosophical debates with famous film director Spike Lee. Lee was a fan of the New York Knicks, a team Miller consistently gave problems with his high-percentage three-point shooting and ability to use Eastern philosophy to address problems of Western existentialism. After he discovered that Lee was a Nietzsche scholar and firm believer in the idea of the Übermensch, he dismissed Lee as unserious and philosophically immature. Miller publicly called out Lee's submission to Nietzsche as infantile and quoted his intellectual hero in an interview with ESPN in rebuttal to Lee. But Miller's basketball tribulations didn't stop there. Reggie Miller led the Indiana Pacers, a team notoriously destitute of accomplishments, to the playoffs nearly every year of his prime, but was unable to accomplish his dream of winning a championship. Nearly every year, Miller got one step closer to success, only for it to end in disappointment. After these repeated failures, Reggie Miller began to refer to himself as the Job of the NBA. Many in the media took this to mean that he was going to prematurely end his career and take his own basketball life. Miller, however, was already resigned to the prospect of failure. Miller, through Cioran's lens, saw basketball as a pointless exercise that people arbitrarily place importance in, and from this, he began not to take his athletic career so seriously. He was an accident. His love of basketball was an accident. Why then would it matter if he foiled the Pacers' one chance to win an NBA title? Why then would he waste his energy caring that Steph Curry eclipsed his all-time three-point record? Aspiration is agony. Living is agony. Basketball is agony. Cioran helped Miller see the necessity of pessimism, the necessity of failure. This is similar to when Cioran's mother said that if she knew her son would be so unhappy, she would have aborted him. This, however, didn't upset Cioran, but instead gave him an insight. If I'm an accident, why take everything so seriously? He said. For the pessimistic, their only source of anything remotely related to pleasure is through pessimism itself. The human being is doomed to feel despair. For failures, any pseudo-joy available to them is possible only if they are able to revel in their mistakes, to toast to their aborted dreams. It is from this intellectual spring that Miller learned how to cope with his inability to succeed, not by running away from failure, but by understanding that failure is the inevitable outcome of living with a mind in a mindless universe and a heart in a heartless world. After their defeat in the 2000 season, Miller's Pacers never made an impression in the playoffs again, and his personal life began to unravel. He went through a messy divorce with his then-wife and lost his home and most of their belongings in a mysterious house fire. Reggie Miller's misery would never be amended from here forward. His last season, 2005, was the season famous for the Malice at the Palace incident, in which his teammates fought with fans at the Palace of Auburn Hills Arena in Detroit. A brawl broke out when fans began hurling cups of beer and logical fallacies at the Pacers players. It ultimately came to blows, and the argument turned into a philosophical disagreement about the inconsequentiality of birth as the main catalyst for suffering. Miller did not participate in the skirmish, and in fact tried to break up the fight, as he did not believe the philosophical differences were worth reconciling, even if they could be reconciled at all, as he was a fervent irrationalist. Miller knew, after that incident, that his time had come to retire, ultimately coming to terms with the futility of basketball. After retiring, Miller joined TNT as an NBA analyst and philosophical consultant, and would serve as an intellectual contributor on scholarly debate forums like the Dan Patrick Show. In his retirement speech, Miller echoed the pessimistic philosophy of his ideological luminary, Emil Cioran. As far as I'm concerned, I resign from basketball. I no longer want to be, nor can still be, a basketball player. What should I do? Work for an aristocratic and consumerist system, make the fans miserable? Hunt for weaknesses in philosophical and defensive schemes of opponents, fight for moral and athletic ideals? It's all too little. I renounce my teammates even though I may find myself alone. But am I not already alone in this world from which I no longer expect anything? In his personal life, Miller now lives in Riverside, California with his partner, Laura Laskowski, and their 3 children. This may be one of the few ways in which Miller has departed from Cioran's philosophy. Cioran said that to become a father was a crime, but Miller has had several children and has, at least not publicly, shown any signs of remorse. Through Cioran, Reggie Miller learned to face life's insurmountable misery not as something to be beaten back with thoughtless positivism, but as a tidal wave that can only be braced for and endured. And through Miller, we can see Cioran's teachings in action. Though Miller understood the inevitability of failure and the impossibility of happiness no matter the heights of achievement, Miller did not simply do nothing. Miller continued forward and did the only thing he could do, the only thing he felt compelled to do. He played basketball. However, he didn't hold his breath waiting for the torment to end, nor for life to suddenly materialize a meaning out of nothing. It is through Cioran's work that Reggie Miller learned that the unavoidable suffering of life and basketball are not something to be overcome with optimism, for it is the optimists that don't know how to handle suffering. The pessimists, however, are able to continue on no matter the exiles and tortures of life. Optimists are fueled by motivation, but what happens when that motivation runs dry? The pessimists need no driving force. They don't need to be moved. They don't need to be applauded. They don't need life to fill them with some pretend sense of inspiration. Pessimists don't even need life to be good. And this is how Reggie Miller learned how to be the loser.